Louis XVI was executed because they considered him to be a criminal, and a year later his judges were killed too for something. What is wrong? What is right? What must one love? What must one hate? What is life for, and what am I? What is life? What is death? What force controls it all? He asked himself. And there was no answer to one of these questions, except one illogical reply that was in no way an answer to any of them. That reply was, one dies, and it's all over. One dies, and finds it all out, or ceases asking. But dying, too, was terrible. The Torjok peddler woman, in a whining voice, proffered her wares, especially some goatskin slippers. I have hundreds of roubles I don't know what to do with, and she's standing in her torn cloak, looking timidly at me, thought Pierre. And what does she want the money for? As though that money could give her one hair's breadth of happiness, of peace of soul. Is there anything in the world that can make her and me less enslaved to evil and to death? Death, which ends all, and must come today or tomorrow, which beside eternity is the same as an instant's time. And again he turned the screw that did not bite in anything, and the screw still went on turning in the same place. His servant handed him a half-cut volume of a novel in the form of letters by Madame Souza. He began reading of the sufferings and the virtuous struggles of a certain Amélie de Mansfeld. And what did she struggle against her seducer for, he thought, when she loved him? God could not have put in her heart an impulse that was against his will. My wife, as she was once, didn't struggle, and perhaps she was right. Nothing has been discovered, Pierre said to himself again. Nothing has been invented. We can only know that we know nothing, and that's the highest degree of human wisdom. Everything within himself and around him struck him as confused, meaningless, and loathsome. But in this very loathing of everything surrounding him, Pierre found a sort of tantalizing satisfaction. I make bold to beg your Excellency to make room the least bit for this gentleman here, said the overseer, coming into the room and ushering in after him another traveler, brought to a standstill from lack of horses. The traveler was a thick-set, square-shouldered, yellow, wrinkled old man, with gray eyelashes overhanging gleaming eyes of an indefinite gray color. Pierre took his feet off the table, stood up, and went to lie down on the bed that had been made ready for him, glancing now and then at the newcomer, who, without looking at Pierre, with an air of surly fatigue, was wearily taking off his outer wraps with the aid of his servant. The traveler, now clothed in a shabby nankeen-covered sheepskin coat, with felt high boots on his thin bony legs, sat down on the sofa, and leaning on its back, his close-cropped head, which was very large and broad across the temples, he glanced at Betsuhoff. The stern, shrewd, and penetrating expression in that glance impressed Pierre. He felt disposed to speak to the traveler, but by the time he had ready a question about the road with which to address him, the traveler had closed his eyes and folded his wrinkled old hands, on one finger of which there was a large iron ring with a seal representing the head of Adam. He sat without stirring, either resting or sunk, as it seemed to Pierre, in profound and calm meditation. The newcomer's servant was also a yellow old man, covered with wrinkles. He had neither mustache nor beard, not because he was shaved, but obviously had never had any. The old servant was active in unpacking a traveling case, in setting the tea-table, and in bringing in a boiling samovar. When everything was ready, the traveler opened his eyes, moved to the table, and pouring out a glass of tea for himself, poured out another for the beardless old man and gave it him. Pierre began to feel an uneasiness and a sense of the necessity, of the inevitability of entering into conversation with the traveler. The servant brought back his empty glass, turned upside down, with an unfinished piece of nibbled sugar beside it, and asked if anything were wanted. "Nothing. Give me my book," said the traveler. The servant gave him a book, which seemed to Pierre to be of a devotional character, and the traveller became absorbed in its perusal. Pierre looked at him. All at once the stranger laid down the book, and putting a mark in it, shut it up. Then closing his eyes and leaning his arms on the back of the sofa, he fell back into his former attitude. Pierre stared at him, and had not time to look away when the old man opened his eyes and bent his resolute and stern glance upon Pierre. Pierre felt confused and tried to turn away from that glance, but the gleaming old eyes drew him irresistibly to them. Chapter 2. I have the pleasure of speaking to Count Betsuhov, if I am not mistaken, said the stranger, in a loud, deliberate voice. Pierre looked in silence and inquiringly over his spectacles at the speaker. I have heard of you, continued the stranger, and I have heard, sir, of what has happened to you, of your misfortune. He underlined, as it were, the last word, as though to say, yes, misfortune, whatever you call it. I know that what happened to you in Moscow was a misfortune. I am very sorry for it, sir. Pierre reddened, and hurriedly dropping his legs over the edge of the bed, he bent forward towards the old man, smiling timidly and unnaturally. I have not mentioned this to you, sir, from curiosity, but from graver reasons. He paused, not letting Pierre escape from his gaze, and moved aside on the sofa, inviting him by this movement to sit beside him. Pierre disliked entering into conversation with his old man, but involuntarily submitting to him, he came up and sat down beside him. You are unhappy, sir, he went on. You are young, and I am old. I should like, as far as it is in my power, to help you. Oh, yes, said Pierre, with an unnatural smile. Very much obliged to you. Where have you been traveling from? The stranger's face was not cordial. It was even cold and severe. But in spite of that, both the speech and the face of his new acquaintance were irresistibly attractive to Pierre. But if for any reason you dislike conversing with me, said the old man, then you say so, sir. And suddenly he smiled a quite unexpected smile of fatherly kindliness. Oh no, not at all. On the contrary, I am very glad to make your acquaintance, said Pierre, and glancing once more at the stranger's hands, he examined the ring more closely. He saw the head of Adam, the token of masonry. Allow me to inquire, he said, are you a Mason? Yes, I belong to the Brotherhood of the Freemasons, said the stranger, looking now more searchingly into Pierre's eyes. And from myself and in their name, I hold out to you a brotherly hand. I'm afraid, said Pierre, smiling and hesitating between the confidence inspired in him by the personality of the Freemason and the habit of ridiculing the articles of the Mason's creed. I am afraid that I am very far from a comprehension. How shall I say? I am afraid that my way of thinking in regard to the whole theory of the universe is so opposed to yours that we shall not understand one another. I am aware of your way of thinking, said the Freemason, and that way of thinking of which you speak, which seems to you the result of your own thought, is the way of thinking of the majority of men, and is the invariable fruit of pride, indolence, and ignorance. Excuse my saying, sir, that if I had not been aware of it, I should not have addressed you. Your way of thinking is a melancholy error. Just as I may take for granted that you are in error, said Pierre, faintly smiling. I would never be so bold as to say I know the truth, said the Mason, the definiteness and decision of whose manner of speaking impressed Pierre more and more. No one alone can attain truth. Only stone upon stone, with the cooperation of all, by the millions of generations from our first father Adam down to our day, is that temple being reared, that should be a fitting dwelling-place of the great God," said the Freemason, and he shut his eyes. "I ought to tell you that I don't believe in God," said Pierre regretfully and with effort, feeling it essential to speak the whole truth. The Freemason looked intently at Pierre, and smiled as a rich man, holding millions in his hands, might smile to a poor wretch, who should say to him that he, the poor man, has not 5 rubles that would secure his happiness. "Yes, you do not know him, sir," said the Freemason. "You cannot know him. You do not know him, that is why you are unhappy." Yes, I am unhappy," Pierre assented. "But what am I to do?" "You know not him, sir, and that's why you are very unhappy. You know not him, but he is here. He is within me. He is in my words. He is in thee, and even in these scoffing words that thou hast just uttered," said the Mason in a stern, vibrating voice. He paused and sighed, evidently trying to be calm. "If he were not," he said softly, "we should not be speaking of him, sir." "Of what? Of whom were we speaking?" "Whom dost thou deny?" he said all at once, with enthusiastic austerity and authority in his voice. "Who invented him, if he be not? How came there within thee the conception that there is such an incomprehensible being? How comes it that thou and all the world have assumed the existence of such an inconceivable being, a being all-powerful, eternal, and infinite in all his qualities?" He stopped and made a long pause. Pierre could not and would not interrupt this silence. "He exists, but to comprehend him is hard," the Mason began again, not looking into Pierre's face, but straight before him, while his old hands, which could not keep still for inward emotion, turned the leaves of the book. "If it had been a man of whose existence thou hadst doubts, I could have brought thee the man, taken him by the hand, and shown him thee. But how am I, an insignificant mortal, to show all the power, all the eternity, all the blessedness of him to one who is blind, or to one who shuts his eyes that he may not see, may not understand him, and may not see and not understand all his own vileness and viciousness?" He paused. "Who art thou? What art thou? Thou dreamest that thou art wise, because thou couldst utter those scoffing words," he said, with a gloomy and scornful irony, "while thou art more foolish and artless than a little babe who, playing with the parts of a cunningly fashioned watch, should rashly say that because he understands not the use of that watch, he does not believe in the Maker who fashioned it. To know him is a hard matter. For ages, from our first father Adam to our day, have we been striving for this knowledge, and are infinitely far from the attainment of our aim. But in our lack of understanding, we see only our own weakness and his greatness." Pierre gazed with shining eyes into the Freemason's face, listening with a thrill at his heart to his words. He did not interrupt him, nor ask questions, but with all his soul he believed what this strange man was telling him. Whether he believed on the rational grounds put before him by the Freemason, or believed as children do, through the intonations, the conviction, and the earnestness of the Mason's words, the quiver in his voice that sometimes almost broke his utterance, or the gleaming old eyes that had grown old in that conviction, or the calm, the resolution, and the certainty of his destination, which were conspicuous in the whole personality of the old man, and struck Pierre with particular force, beside his own abjectness and hopelessness. Anyway, with his whole soul, he longed to believe, and believed and felt a joyful sense of soothing, of renewal, and of return to life. "It is not attained by the reason, but by life," said the Mason. "I don't understand," said Pierre, feeling with dismay that doubt was stirring within him. He dreaded obscurity and feebleness in the Freemason's arguments. He dreaded being unable to believe in him. "I don't understand," he said, "in what way human reason cannot attain that knowledge of which you speak." The Freemason smiled his mild, fatherly smile. "The highest wisdom and truth is like the purest dew, which we try to hold within us," said he. "Can I hold in an impure vessel that pure dew and judge of its purity? Only by the inner purification of myself can I bring that dew contained within me to some degree of purity." "Yes, yes, that's so," Pierre said joyfully. "The highest wisdom is founded not on reason only, not on those worldly sciences of physics, history, chemistry, etc., into which knowledge of the intellect is divided. The highest wisdom is one. The highest wisdom knows but one science, the science of the whole, the science that explains the whole creation and the place of man in it. To instill this science into one's soul, it is needful to purify and renew one's inner man, and so, before one can know, one must believe and be made perfect. And for the attainment of these aims, there has been put into our souls the light of God, called the conscience." "Yes, yes," Pierre assented. "Look with the spiritual eye into thy inner man, and ask of thyself whether thou art content with thyself. What hast thou attained with the guidance of the intellect alone? What art thou? You are young. You are wealthy. You are cultured, sir. What have you made of all the blessings vouchsafed you? Are you satisfied with yourself and your life?" "No, I hate my life," said Pierre, frowning. "Thou hatest it. Then change it. Purify thyself, and as thou art purified, thou wilt come to know wisdom. Look at your life, sir. How have you been spending it? In riotous orgies and debauchery, taking everything from society and giving nothing in return. You have received wealth. How have you used it? What have you done for your neighbor? Have you given a thought to the tens of thousands of your slaves? Have you succored them physically and morally? No. You have profited by their toil to lead a dissipated life. That's what you have done. Have you chosen a post in the service where you might be of use to your neighbor? No. You have spent your life in idleness. Then you married, sir, took upon yourself the responsibility of guiding a young woman in life. And what have you done? You have not helped her, sir, to find the path of truth, but have cast her into an abyss of deception and misery. A man injured you, and you have killed him, and you say you do not know God, and that you hate your life. There is no wisdom in all that, sir." After these words, the Freemason leaned his elbow again on the back of the sofa and closed his eyes, as though weary of prolonged talking. Pierre gazed at that stern, immovable, old, almost death-like face, and moved his lips without uttering a sound. He wanted to say, "Yes, a vile, idle, vicious life," and he dared not break the silence. The Freemason cleared his throat huskily, as old men do, and called his servant. "How about horses?" he asked. without looking at Pierre. "They have brought round some that were given up," answered the old man. "You won't rest?" "No. Tell them to harness them." Can he really be going away and leaving me all alone, without telling me everything and promising me help? Thought Pierre, getting up with downcast head, beginning to walk up and down the room, casting a glance from time to time at the Freemason. Yes, I had not thought of it, but I have led a contemptible, dissolute life. But I did not like it, and I didn't want to, thought Pierre. And this man knows the truth, and if he liked, he could reveal it to me. Pierre wanted to say this to the Freemason, and dared not. After packing his things with his practiced old hands, the traveler buttoned up his sheepskin. On finishing these preparations, he turned to Betsuhov, and in a polite, indifferent tone, said to him, "Where are you going now, sir?" "I'm going to Petersburg," answered Pierre, in a tone of childish indecision. "I thank you. I agree with you in everything. But do not suppose that I have been so bad. With all my soul I have desired to be what you should wish me to be, but I have never met with help from anyone, though I was myself most to blame for everything. Help me, instruct me, and perhaps I shall be able—" Pierre could not say more. His voice broke, and he turned away. The Freemason was silent, obviously pondering something. "Help comes only from God," he said. "But such measure of aid as it is in the power of our order to give you, it will give you, sir. You go to Petersburg, and give this to Count Vilarsky." He took out of his notebook and wrote a few words on a large sheet of paper folded into 4. "One piece of advice let me give you. When you reach the capital, devote your time at first there to solitude and to self-examination, and do not return to your old manner of life. Therewith I wish you a good journey, sir," he added, noticing that his servant had entered the room, "and all success." The stranger was Osip Alexievich Bazdiev, as Pierre found out from the overseer's book. Bazdiev had been one of the most well-known Freemasons and Martinists even in Novikov's day. For a long while after he had gone, Pierre walked about the station-room, neither lying down to sleep nor asking for horses. He reviewed his vicious past, and with an ecstatic sense of beginning anew, pictured to himself a blissful, irreproachably virtuous future, which seemed to him easy of attainment. It seemed to him that he had been vicious simply because he had accidentally forgotten how good it was to be virtuous. There was left in his soul not a trace of his former doubts. He firmly believed in the possibility of the brotherhood of man, united in the aim of supporting one another in the path of virtue, and Freemasonry he pictured to himself as such a brotherhood. Chapter 3. On reaching Petersburg, Pierre let no one know of his arrival, went out to see nobody, and spent whole days in reading Thomas à Kempis, a book which had been sent him, he did not know from whom. One thing, and one thing only, Pierre thoroughly understood in reading that book. He understood what he had hitherto known nothing of, all the bliss of believing in the possibility of attaining perfection, and in the possibility of brotherly and active love between men, revealed to him by Osip Alexievich. A week after his arrival, the young Polish Count Vilarsky, whom Pierre knew very slightly in Petersburg society, came one evening into his room with the same official and ceremonious air with which Dolohov's second had called on him. Closing the door behind him, and assuring himself that there was nobody in the room but Pierre, he addressed him. "I have come to you with a message and a suggestion, Count," he said to him, not sitting down. "A personage of a very high standing in our brotherhood has been interceding for you to be admitted into our brotherhood before the usual term, and has asked me to be your sponsor. I regard it as a sacred duty to carry out that person's wishes. Do you wish, under my sponsorship, to enter the Brotherhood of Freemasons?" Pierre was impressed by the cold and austere tone of this man, whom he had almost always seen before at balls, wearing an agreeable smile, in the society of the most brilliant women. "Yes, I do wish it," said Pierre. Villarsky bent his head. "One more question, Count," he said, "to which I beg you, not as a future Mason, but as an honest man, galant homme, to answer me in all sincerity. Have you renounced your former convictions? Do you believe in God?" Pierre thought a moment. Yes, I do believe in God," he said. "In that case," Villarsky was beginning, but Pierre interrupted him. "Yes, I believe in God," he said once more. "In that case, we can go," said Villarsky. "My carriage is at your disposal." Throughout the drive, Villarsky was silent. In answer to Pierre's inquiries, what he would have to do, and how he would have to answer, Villarsky simply said that brothers, more worthy than he, would prove him, and that Pierre need do nothing but tell the truth. They drove in at the gates of a large house, where the lodge had its quarters, and, passing up a dark staircase, entered a small, lighted anteroom, where they took off their overcoats without the assistance of servants. From the anteroom they walked into another room. A man in strange attire appeared at the door. Villarsky, going in to meet him, said something to him in French in a low voice, and went up to a small cupboard, where Pierre noticed garments unlike any he had seen before. Taking a handkerchief from the cupboard, Villarsky put it over Pierre's eyes, and tied it in a knot behind, catching his hair painfully in the knot. Then he drew him towards himself, kissed him, and, taking him by the hand, led him away somewhere. Pierre had been hurt by his hair being pulled in the knot. He puckered up his face from the pain, and smiled with vague shame. His huge figure, with his arms hanging at his sides, and his face puckering up and smiling, moved after Villarsky with timid and uncertain steps. After leading him for about 10 steps, Villarsky stopped. "Whatever happens to you," said he, "you must endure all with good courage, if you are firmly resolved to enter our brotherhood." Pierre answered affirmatively by an inclination of his head. "When you hear a knock at the door, you may uncover your eyes," added Villarsky. "I wish you good courage and success." And, pressing Pierre's hand, Villarsky went away. When he was left alone, Pierre still went on smiling in the same way. Twice he shrugged his shoulders and raised his hand to the handkerchief, as though he would have liked to take it off, but he let it drop again. The 5 minutes he had spent with his eyes bandaged seemed to him an hour. His arms felt numb, his legs tottered. He felt as though he were tired out. He was aware of the most complex and conflicting feelings. He was afraid of what would be done to him, and still more afraid of showing fear. He felt inquisitive to know what was coming, what would be revealed to him. But above everything, he felt joy that the moment had come when he would at last enter upon that path of regeneration and of an actively virtuous life, of which he had been dreaming ever since his meeting with Osip Alexievich. There came loud knocks at the door. Pierre took off the bandage and looked about him. It was black darkness in the room. Only in one spot there was a little lamp burning before something white. Pierre went nearer, and saw that the little lamp stood on a black table, on which there lay an open book. The book was the Gospel. The white thing in which the lamp was burning was a human skull, with its eye holes and teeth. After reading the first words of the Gospel, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God," Pierre went round the table and caught sight of a large open box filled with something. It was a coffin full of bones. He was not in the least surprised by what he saw. Hoping to enter upon a completely new life, utterly unlike the old life, he was ready for anything extraordinary, more extraordinary indeed than what he was seeing. The skull, the coffin, the gospel. It seemed to him that he had been expecting all that, had been expecting more indeed. He tried to stir up a devotional feeling in himself. He looked about him. God, death, love, the brotherhood of man, he kept saying to himself, associating with those words vague but joyful conceptions of some sort. The door opened, and someone came in. In the faint light, in which Pierre could, however, see a little by this time, a short man approached. Apparently dazed by coming out of the light into the darkness, the man stopped, then with cautious steps moved again towards the table, and laid on it both his small hands, covered with leather gloves. This short man was wearing a white leather apron that covered his chest and part of his legs. Upon his neck could be seen something like a necklace, and a high white ruffle stood up from under the necklace, framing his long face, on which the light fell from below. "For what are you come hither?" asked the newcomer, turning towards Pierre at a faint rustle made by the latter. "For what are you, an unbeliever in the truth of the light, who have not seen the light? For what are you come here? What do you seek from us? Wisdom, virtue, enlightenment?" At the moment when the door opened and the unknown person came in, Pierre had a sensation of awe and reverence, such as he had felt in childhood at confession. He felt himself alone with a man who was in the circumstances of life a complete stranger, and yet, through the brotherhood of men, so near. With a beating heart that made him gasp for breath, Pierre turned to the rhetor, as in the phraseology of Freemasonry the man is called who prepares the seeker for entering the brotherhood. Going closer, Pierre recognized in the rhetor a man he knew, Smolyaninov, but it was mortifying to him to think that the newcomer was a familiar figure. He was to him only a brother and a guide in the path of virtue. For a long while Pierre could not utter a word, so that the rhetor was obliged to repeat his question. "Yes, I wish to begin anew," Pierre articulated with difficulty. "Very good," said Smolyaninov, and went on at once. "Have you any idea of the means by which our holy order will assist you in attaining your aim?" said the rhetor calmly and rapidly. "I hope for guidance, for help in renewing," said Pierre, with a tremble in his voice and a difficulty in utterance due both to emotion and to being unaccustomed to speak of abstract subjects in Russian. "What idea have you of Freemasonry?" "I assume that Freemasonry is the fraternité and equality of men with virtuous aims," said Pierre, feeling ashamed as he spoke of the incongruity of his words with the solemnity of the moment. "I assume—" "Very good," said the rhetor hastily, apparently quite satisfied with the reply. "Have you sought the means of attaining your aim in religion?" "No, I regarded it as untrue and have not followed it," said Pierre, so softly that the rhetor did not catch it, and asked him what he was saying. "I was an atheist," answered Pierre. "You seek the truth in order to follow its laws in life. Consequently, you seek wisdom and virtue, do you not?" said the rhetor, after a moment's pause. "Yes, yes," assented Pierre. The rhetor cleared his throat, folded his gloved hands across his chest, and began speaking. "Now I must reveal to you the chief aim of our order," he said, "and if that aim coincides with yours, you may with profit enter our brotherhood. The first and greatest aim, and united basis of our order, on which it is established, and which no human force can destroy, is the preservation and handing down to posterity of a certain important mystery that has come down to us from the most ancient times, even from the first man, a mystery upon which, perhaps, the fate of the human race depends. But since this mystery is of such a kind that no one can know it and profit by it, if he has not been prepared by a prolonged and diligent self-purification, not everyone can hope to attain it quickly. Hence, we have a second aim, which consists in preparing our members, as far as possible reforming their hearts, purifying and enlightening their intelligence by those means which have been revealed to us by tradition, from men who have striven to attain this mystery, and thereby to render them fit for the reception of it. Purifying and regenerating our members, we endeavor, thirdly, to improve the whole human race, offering it, in our members, an example of piety and virtue, and thereby we strive with all our strength to combat the evil that is paramount in the world. Ponder on these things, and I will come again to you, he said, and went out of the room. To combat the evil that is paramount in the world, Pierre repeated, and a mental image of his future activity in that direction rose before him. He seemed to see men such as he had been himself a fortnight ago, and he was mentally addressing an edifying exhortation to them. He pictured to himself persons vicious and unhappy, whom he would help in word and in deed. He pictured oppressors whose victims he would rescue. Of the three aims enumerated by the Rhetor, the last, the reformation of the human race, appealed particularly to Pierre. The great mystery of which the Rhetor had made mention, though it excited his curiosity, did not strike his imagination as a reality, while the second aim, the purification and regeneration of himself, had little interest for him, because at that moment he was full of a blissful sense of being completely cured of all his former vices, and being ready for nothing but goodness. Half an hour later, the Rhetor returned to enumerate to the seeker the 7 virtues corresponding to the 7 steps of the Temple of Solomon, in which every Freemason must train himself. Those virtues were, 1. Discretion, the keeping of the secrets of the order. 2. Obedience to the higher authorities of the order. 3. Morality. 4. Love for mankind. 5. Courage. 6. Liberality. And 7. Love of death. Seventhly, strive, said the Rhetor, by frequent meditation upon death, to bring yourself to feel it not an enemy to be dreaded, but a friend, which delivers the soul grown weary in the labors of virtue from this distressful life, and leads it to its place of recompense and peace. Yes, that's as it should be, thought Pierre, when the Rhetor, after these words, left him again to solitary reflection. That's as it ought to be, but I'm still so weak as to love this life, the meaning of which is only now by degrees being revealed to me. But the other 5 virtues which Pierre recalled, reckoning them on his fingers, he felt already in his soul: courage and liberality, morality and love for mankind, and above all, obedience, which seemed to him not to be a virtue indeed, but a happiness. It was such a joy to him now to be escaping from the guidance of his own caprice, and to be submitting his will to those who knew the absolute truth. The 7th virtue Pierre had forgotten, and he could not recall it. The 3rd time the Rhetor came back sooner, and asked Pierre whether he were still resolute in his intention, and whether he were prepared to submit to everything that would be demanded of him. "I am ready for anything," said Pierre. "I must inform you further," said the Rhetor, "that our order promulgates its doctrine not by word only, but by certain means, which have perhaps on the true seeker after wisdom and virtue a more potent effect than merely verbal explanations. This temple, with what you see therein, should shed more light on your heart, if it is sincere, than any words can do. You will see, maybe, a like method of enlightenment in the further rites of your admittance. Our order follows the usage of ancient societies, which revealed their doctrine in hieroglyphs." "A hieroglyph," said the Rhetor, is the name given to a symbol of some object, imperceptible to the senses, and possessing qualities similar to those of the symbol. Pierre knew very well what a hieroglyph was, but he did not venture to say so. He listened to the rhetor in silence, feeling from everything he said that his ordeal was soon to begin. "If you are resolved, I must proceed to your initiation," said the rhetor, coming closer to Pierre. "In token of liberality, I beg you to give me everything precious you have." "But I have nothing with me," said Pierre, supposing he was being asked to give up all his possessions. "What you have with you: watch, money, rings." Pierre made haste to get out his purse and his watch, and was a long time trying to get his betrothal ring off his fat finger. When this had been done, the Freemason said, "In token of obedience, I beg you to undress." Pierre took off his coat and waistcoat, and left boot at the rhetor's instructions. The Mason opened his shirt over the left side of his chest, and pulled up his breeches on the left leg above the knee. Pierre would hurriedly have taken off the right boot and tucked up the trouser leg, to save this stranger the trouble of doing so, but the Mason told him this was not necessary, and gave him a slipper to put on his left foot. With a childish smile of embarrassment, of doubt, and of self-mockery, which would come into his face in spite of himself, Pierre stood with his legs wide apart and his hands hanging at his side, facing the rhetor and awaiting his next commands. "And finally, in token of candor, I beg you to disclose to me your chief temptation," he said. "My temptation? I had so many," said Pierre. "The temptation which does more than all the rest to make you stumble on the path of virtue," said the Freemason. Pierre paused, seeking a reply. Wine? Gluttony? Frivolity? Laziness? Hasty temper? Anger? Women? He went through his vices, mentally balancing them, and not knowing to which to give the preeminence. "Women," said Pierre, in a low, hardly audible voice. The Freemason did not speak nor stir for a long while after that reply. At last he moved up to Pierre, took the handkerchief that lay on the table, and again tied it over his eyes. "For the last time I say to you, turn all your attention upon yourself, put a bridle on your feelings, and seek blessedness not in your passions, but in your own heart. The secret of blessing is not without, but within us." Pierre had for a long while been conscious of this refreshing fount of blessing within him, that now flooded his heart with joy and emotion. Pierre had for a long while been conscious of this refreshing fount of blessing within him, that now flooded his heart with joy and emotion. Chapter 4. Shortly after this, there walked into the dark temple to fetch Pierre, not the rhetor, but his sponsor Vilarsky, whom he recognized by his voice. In reply to fresh inquiries as to the firmness of his resolve, Pierre answered, "Yes, yes, I agree," and with a beaming, childlike smile, he walked forward, stepping timidly and unevenly with one booted and one slippered foot, while Vilarsky held a sword pointed at his fat, uncovered chest. He was led out of the room along corridors, turning backwards and forwards, till at last he was brought to the doors of the lodge. Vilarsky coughed. He was answered by Masonic taps with hammers. The door opened before them. A bass voice, Pierre's eyes were again bandaged, put questions to him, who he was, where and when he was born, and so on. Then he was again led away somewhere with his eyes still bandaged, and as he walked they spoke to him in allegories of the toils of his pilgrimage, and of holy love, of the eternal Creator of the world, of the courage with which he was to endure toils and dangers. During this time Pierre noticed that he was called sometimes the seeker, sometimes the sufferer, and sometimes the postulant, and that they made various tapping sounds with hammers and with swords. While he was being led up to some object, he noticed that there was hesitation and uncertainty among his conductors. He heard a whispered dispute among the people round him, and one of them insisting that he should be made to cross a certain carpet. After this, they took his right hand, laid it on something, while they bade him with the left hold a compass to his left breast, while they made him repeat after someone who read the words aloud, the oath of fidelity to the laws of the order. Then the candles were extinguished, and spirit was lighted, as Pierre knew from the smell of it, and he was told that he would see the lesser light. The bandage was taken off his eyes, and in the faint light of the burning spirit, Pierre saw, as though it were in a dream, several persons who stood facing him in aprons like the rhetors, and held swords pointed at his breast. Among them stood a man in a white shirt stained with blood. On seeing this, Pierre moved with his chest forward towards the swords, meaning them to stab him. But the swords were drawn back, and the bandage was at once replaced on his eyes. "Now you have seen the lesser light," said a voice. Then again they lighted the candles, told him that he had now to see the full light, and again removed the bandage, and more than 10 voices said all at once, "Sic transit gloria mundi." Pierre gradually began to regain his self-possession, and to look about at the room and the people in it. Round a long table covered with black were sitting some dozen men, all in the same strange garment that he had seen before. Several of them Pierre knew in Petersburg society. In the president's chair sat a young man, with a peculiar cross on his neck, whom he did not know. On his right hand sat the Italian abbé, whom Pierre had seen 2 years before at Anna Pavlovna's. There were among them a dignitary of very high standing, and a Swiss tutor, who had once been in the Kuragin family. All preserved a solemn silence, listening to the president, who held a hammer in his hand. In the wall was carved a blazing star. On one side of the table was a small rug with various figures worked upon it. On the other was something like an altar with the gospel and a skull on it. Round the table stood 7 big ecclesiastical-looking candlesticks. 2 of the brothers led Pierre up to the altar, set his feet at right angles, and bade him lie down, saying that he would be casting himself down at the gates of the temple. "He ought first to receive the spade," said one of the brothers in a whisper. "Oh, hush, please," said another. Pierre did not obey, but with uneasy, short-sighted eyes looked about him, and suddenly doubt came over him. "Where am I? What am I doing? Aren't they laughing at me? Shan't I be ashamed to remember this?" But this doubt only lasted a moment. Pierre looked round at the serious faces of the people round him, thought of all he had just been through, and felt that there was no stopping halfway. He was terrified at his own hesitation, and trying to arouse in himself his former devotional feeling, he cast himself down at the gates of the temple. And the devotional feeling did in fact come more strongly than ever upon him. When he had lain there some time, he was told to get up, and a white leather apron such as the others wore was put round him, and a spade and 3 pairs of gloves were put in his hands. Then the Grand Master addressed him. He told him that he must try never to stain the whiteness of that apron, which symbolized strength and purity. Then of the unexplained spade, he told him to toil with it at clearing his heart from vice, and with forbearing patience smoothing the way in the heart of his neighbor. Then of the first pair of gloves, he said that he could not know yet their significance, but must treasure them. Of the second pair, he said that he must put them on at meetings. And finally of the third pair, they were women's gloves, he said, "Dear brother, and these woman's gloves are destined for you too. Give them to the woman whom you shall honor beyond all others. That gift will be a pledge of your purity of heart to her whom you select as a worthy helpmeet in masonry." After a brief pause, he added, "But beware, dear brother, that these gloves never deck hands that are impure." While the Grand Master uttered the last words, it seemed to Pierre that he was embarrassed. Pierre was even more embarrassed. He blushed to the point of tears, as children blush, looking about him uneasily, and an awkward silence followed. This silence was broken by one of the brothers who, leading Pierre to the rug, began reading out of a manuscript book the interpretation of all the figures delineated upon it: the sun, the moon, the hammer, the balance, the spade, the rough stone and the shaped stone, the post, the 3 windows, etc. Then Pierre was shown his appointed place. He was shown the signs of the lodge, told the password, and at last permitted to sit down. The Grand Master began reading the exhortation. The exhortation was very long, and Pierre, in his joy, his emotion, and his embarrassment, was hardly in a condition to understand what was read. He only grasped the last words of the exhortation, which stuck in his memory. "In our temples we know of no distinctions," read the Grand Master, "but those between virtue and vice. Beware of making any difference that may transgress against equality. Fly to the succor of a brother, whoever he may be. Exhort him that goeth astray. Lift up him that falleth, and cherish not malice nor hatred against a brother. Be thou friendly and courteous. Kindle in all hearts the fire of virtue. Share thy happiness with thy neighbor, and never will envy trouble that pure bliss. Forgive thy enemy, revenge not thyself on him, but by doing him good. Fulfilling in this wise the highest law, thou wilt regain traces of the ancient grandeur thou hast lost," he concluded, and getting up, he embraced Pierre and kissed him. Pierre looked round with tears of joy in his eyes, not knowing how to answer the congratulations and greetings from acquaintances with which he was surrounded. He did not recognize any acquaintances. In all these men he saw only brothers, and he burned with impatience to get to work with them. The Grand Master tapped with his hammer, all sat down in their places, and one began reading a sermon on the necessity of meekness. The Grand Master proposed that the last duty be performed, and the great dignitary whose duty it was to collect the alms began making the round of all the brothers. Pierre would have liked to give to the list of alms all the money he had in the world, but he feared thereby to sin by pride, and only wrote down the same sum as the others. The sitting was over, and it seemed to Pierre on returning home that he had come back from a long journey, on which he had spent dozens of years, and had become utterly changed, and had renounced his old habits and manner of life. Chapter 5. The day after his initiation at the lodge, Pierre was sitting at home reading a book, and trying to penetrate to the significance of the square, which symbolized by one of its sides God, by another the moral, by the third the physical, and by the fourth the nature of both mingled. Now and then he broke off from the book and the symbolic square, and in his imagination shaped his new plan of life. On the previous day he had been told at the lodge that the rumor of the duel had reached the Emperor's ears, and that it would be more judicious for him to withdraw from Petersburg. Pierre proposed going to his estates in the south, and there occupying himself with the care of his peasants. He was joyfully dreaming of this new life when Prince Vasily suddenly walked into his room. "My dear fellow, what have you been about in Moscow? What have you been quarreling over with Ellen, my dear boy?" "You have been making a mistake," said Prince Vasily as he came into the room. "I have heard all about it. I can tell you for a fact that Ellen is as innocent in her conduct towards you as Christ was to the Jews." Pierre would have answered, but he interrupted him. "And why didn't you come simply and frankly to me as to a friend? I know all about it. I understand it all," said he. "You have behaved as was proper for a man who valued his honor. Too hastily, perhaps, but we won't go into that. One thing you must think of. The position you are placing her and me in the eyes of society, and even of the court," he added, dropping his voice. "She is in Moscow, while you are here. Think of it, my dear boy." He drew him down by the arm. "It's simply a misunderstanding. I expect you feel it so yourself. Write a letter with me now at once, and she'll come here, and everything will be explained, or else, I tell you plainly, my dear boy, you may very easily have to suffer for it." Prince Vasily looked significantly at Pierre. "I have learned from excellent sources that the Dowager Empress is taking a keen interest in the whole affair. You know she is very graciously disposed to Ellen." Several times Pierre had prepared himself to speak, but on one hand Prince Vasily would not let him, and on the other hand Pierre himself was loath to begin to speak in the tone of resolute refusal and denial, in which he was firmly resolved to answer his father-in-law. Moreover, the words of the Masonic precept, "Be thou friendly and courteous," recurred to his mind. He blinked and blushed, got up and sank back again, trying to force himself to do what was for him the hardest thing in life, to say an unpleasant thing to a man's face, to say what was not expected by that man, whoever he might be. He was so much in the habit of submitting to that tone of careless authority in which Prince Vasily spoke, that even now he felt incapable of resisting it. But he felt, too, that on what he said now all his future fate would depend, that it would decide whether he continued along the old way of his past life, or advanced along the new path that had been so attractively pointed out to him by the Masons, and that he firmly believed would lead him to regeneration in a new life. "Come, my dear boy," said Prince Vasily playfully, "simply say yes, and I'll write on my own account to her, and we'll kill the fatted calf." But before Prince Vasily had finished uttering his playful words, Pierre, not looking at him, but with a fury in his face that made him like his father, whispered, "Prince, I did not invite you here. Go, please, go." He leaped up and opened the door to him. "Go," he repeated, amazed at himself, and enjoying the expression of confusion and terror in the countenance of Prince Vasily. "What's the matter with you? Are you ill?" "Go," the quivering voice repeated once more, and Prince Vasily had to go, without receiving a word of explanation. A week later, Pierre went away to his estates, after taking leave of his new friends, the Freemasons, and leaving large sums in their hands for alms. His new brethren gave him letters for Kiev and Odessa, to Masons living there, and promised to write to him and guide him in his new activity. Chapter 6. Pierre's duel with Dolohov was smoothed over, and in spite of the Tsar's severity in regard to duels at that time, neither the principals nor the seconds suffered for it. But the scandal of the duel, confirmed by Pierre's rupture with his wife, made a great noise in society. Pierre had been looked upon with patronizing condescension when he was an illegitimate son. He had been made much of and extolled for his virtues, while he was the wealthiest match in the Russian Empire. But after his marriage, when young ladies and their mothers had nothing to hope from him, he had fallen greatly in the opinion of society, especially as he had neither the wit nor the wish to ingratiate himself in public favor. Now the blame of the whole affair was thrown on him. It was said that he was insanely jealous, and subject to the same fits of bloodthirsty fury as his father had been. And when, after Pierre's departure, Ellen returned to Petersburg, she was received by all her acquaintances not only cordially, but with a shade of deference that was a tribute to her distress. When the conversation touched upon her husband, Ellen assumed an expression of dignity, which her characteristic tact prompted her to adopt, though she had no conception of its significance. That expression suggested that she had resolved to bear her affliction without complaint, and that her husband was a cross God had laid upon her. Prince Vasily expressed his opinion more openly. He shrugged his shoulders when the conversation turned upon Pierre, and pointing to his forehead, said, "Crack-brained. I always said so." "I used to say so even before," Anna Pavlovna would say of Pierre. "At the time I said at once, and before everyone," she insisted on her priority, "that he was an insane young man, corrupted by the dissolute ideas of the age. I used to say so at the time when everyone was in such ecstasies over him, and he had only just come home from abroad, and do you remember at one of my soirees he thought fit to pose as a sort of Marat? And how has it ended? Even then I was against this marriage, and foretold all that has come to pass." Anna Pavlovna used still to give soirees on her free days as before, soirees such as only she had the gift of arranging, soirees at which were gathered the cream of really good society, the flower of the intellectual essence of Petersburg society, as Anna Pavlovna herself used to say. Besides this fine sifting of the society, Anna Pavlovna's soirees were further distinguished by some new interesting person, secured by the hostess on every occasion for the entertainment of the company. Moreover, the point on the political thermometer, at which the temperature of loyal court society stood in Petersburg, was nowhere so clearly and unmistakably marked as at these soirees. Towards the end of the year 1806, when all the melancholy details of Napoleon's destruction of the Prussian army at Jena and Auerstadt, and the surrender of the greater number of the Prussian forts, had arrived, when our troops were already entering Prussia, and our second war with Napoleon was beginning, Anna Pavlovna was giving one of her soirees. The cream of really good society consisted of the fascinating and unhappy Ellen, abandoned by her husband, of Mortemar, of the fascinating Prince Hippolyte, who had just come home from Vienna, of 2 diplomats, of the old aunt, of a young man, always referred to in that society by the designation, a man of a great deal of merit, of a newly appointed maid of honor and her mother, and several other less noteworthy persons. The novelty Anna Pavlovna was offering her guests for their entertainment that evening was Boris Drubetskoy, who had just arrived as a special messenger from the Prussian army, and was in the suite of a personage of very high rank. What the political thermometer indicated at that soiree was something as follows. All the European rulers and generals may do their utmost to flatter Bonaparte, with the object of causing me and us generally these annoyances and mortifications. But our opinion in regard to Bonaparte can undergo no change. We do not cease giving undisguised expression to our way of thinking on the subject, and can only say to the Prussian king and others, "So much the worse for you. Tu l'as voulu, Georges Dandin." That's all we can say. This was what the political thermometer indicated at Anna Pavlovna's soiree. When Boris, who was to be offered up to the guests, came into the drawing-room, almost all the company had assembled, and the conversation, guided by Anna Pavlovna, was of our diplomatic relations with Austria, and the hope of an alliance with her. Boris, fresh, rosy, and manlier-looking, walked easily into the drawing-room, wearing the elegant uniform of an adjutant. He was duly conducted to pay his respects to the aunt, and then joined the general circle. Anna Pavlovna gave him her shriveled hand to kiss, introduced him to several persons whom he did not know, and gave him a whispered description of each of them. Prince Hippolyte Kuragin, Monsieur Krug, chargé d'affaires from Copenhagen, a profound intellect, and simply, Monsieur Shitov, a man of a great deal of merit, this of the young man always so spoken of. Thanks to the efforts of Anna Mihalovna, his own tastes, and the peculiarities of his reserved character, Boris had succeeded by that time in getting into a very advantageous position in the service. He was an adjutant in the suite of a personage of very high rank. He had received a very important commission in Prussia, and had only just returned thence as a special messenger. He had completely assimilated that unwritten code which had so pleased him at Olmütz, that code in virtue of which a lieutenant may stand infinitely higher than a general, and all that is needed for success in the service is not effort, not work, not gallantry, not perseverance, but simply the art of getting on with those who have the bestowal of promotion. And he often himself marveled at the rapidity of his own progress, and that others failed to grasp the secret of it. His whole manner of life, all his relations with his old friends, all his plans for the future were completely transformed in consequence of this discovery. He was not well off, but he spent his last kopeck to be better dressed than others. He would have deprived himself of many pleasures rather than have allowed himself to drive in an inferior carriage, or to be seen in the streets of Petersburg in an old uniform. He sought the acquaintance and cultivated the friendship only of persons who were in a higher position, and could consequently be of use to him. He loved Petersburg, and despised Moscow. His memories of the Rostov household and his childish passion for Natasha were distasteful to him, and he had not once been at the Rostovs since he had entered the army. In Anna Pavlovna's drawing-room, his entry into which he looked upon as an important step upward in the service, he at once took his cue, and let Anna Pavlovna make the most of what interest he had to offer, while himself attentively watching every face, and appraising the advantages and possibilities of intimacy with every one of the persons present. He sat on the seat indicated to him, beside the fair Ellen, and listened to the general conversation. Vienna considers the basis of the proposed treaty so unattainable that not even a continuance of the most brilliant successes would put them within reach, and doubts whether any means could gain them for us. These are the actual words of the ministry in Vienna, said the Danish chargé d'affaires. It is polite of them, no doubt, said the man of profound intellect with a subtle smile. We must distinguish between the ministry in Vienna and the Emperor of Austria, said Mortemart. The Emperor of Austria can never have thought of such a thing. It is only the ministers who say it. Ah, my dear Vicomte, put in Anna Pavlovna, Europe will never be our sincere ally. Then Anna Pavlovna turned the conversation upon the courage and firmness of the Prussian king, with the object of bringing Boris into action. Boris listened attentively to the person who was speaking, and waited for his turn, but meanwhile he had leisure to look round several times at the fair Ellen, who several times met the handsome young adjutant's eyes with a smile. Very naturally, speaking of the position of Prussia, Anna Pavlovna asked Boris to describe his journey to Glogau, and the position in which he had found the Prussian army. Boris, in his pure, correct French, told them very deliberately a great many interesting details about the armies and the court, studiously abstaining from any expression of his own opinion in regard to the facts he was narrating. For some time Boris engrossed the whole attention of the company, and Anna Pavlovna felt that the novelty she was serving her guests was being accepted by them all with pleasure. Of all the party, the person who showed most interest in Boris's description was Ellen. She asked him several questions about his expedition, and seemed to be extremely interested in the position of the Prussian army. As soon as he had finished, she turned to him with her habitual smile. "You absolutely must come and see me," she said in a tone that suggested that for certain considerations, of which he could have no knowledge, it was absolutely essential. "On Tuesday between 8 and 9. It will give me great pleasure." Boris promised to do so, and was about to enter into conversation with her, when Anna Pavlovna drew him aside on the pretext that her aunt wished to hear his story. "You know her husband, of course," said Anna Pavlovna, dropping her eyelids, and with a melancholy gesture indicating Ellen. "Ah, such an unhappy and exquisite woman. Don't speak of him before her, pray. Don't speak of him. It's too much for her." Chapter 7. When Boris and Anna Pavlovna returned to the rest, Prince Ippolit was in possession of the ear of the company. Bending forward in his low chair, he was saying, "The King of Prussia," and as he said it, he laughed. Everyone turned towards him. "The King of Prussia?" Hippolyte said interrogatively, and again he laughed and again settled himself placidly and seriously in the depths of his big, low chair. Anna Pavlovna paused a little for him, but as Hippolyte seemed quite certainly not intending to say more, she began to speak of how the godless Bonaparte had at Potsdam carried off the sword of Frederick the Great. "It is the sword of Frederick the Great, which she was beginning, but Hippolyte interrupted her with the words, "The King of Prussia," and again, as soon as all turned to listen to him, he excused himself and said no more. Anna Pavlovna frowned. Mortemart, Hippolyte's friend, addressed him with decision. "Come, what are you after with your King of Prussia?" Hippolyte laughed as though he were ashamed of his own laughter. "No, it's nothing. I only meant—" He had intended to repeat a joke that he had heard in Vienna, and had been trying all the evening to get in. "I only meant that we are wrong to make war for the King of Prussia." "Faire quelque chose pour le roi de Prusse" is a French idiom meaning to do anything for insufficient reason or in vain. Boris smiled circumspectly, a smile that might do duty either for a sneer or a tribute to the jest, according to the way it was received. Everyone laughed. "It is too bad, your joke. Very witty but unjust," said Anna Pavlovna, shaking her little wrinkled finger at him. "We are not making war for the sake of the King of Prussia, but for the sake of right principles." "Ah, le méchant, ce prince Hippolyte," she said. The conversation did not flag all the evening, and turned principally upon the political news. Towards the end of the evening it became particularly eager, when the rewards bestowed by the Tsar were the subjects of discussion. "Why, last year N.N. received the snuff-box with the portrait," said the man of profound intellect. "Why shouldn't S.S. receive the same reward?" "I beg your pardon, a snuff-box with the Emperor's portrait is a reward, but not a distinction," said a diplomatist. "A present, rather." "There are precedents. I would instance Schwarzenberg." "It is impossible," retorted another. "A bet on it. The ribbon of the order is different." When everyone got up to take leave, Ellen, who had said very little all the evening, turned to Boris again with a request, and a caressing, impressive command that he would come to her on Tuesday. "It is of great importance to me," she said with a smile, looking round at Anna Pavlovna, and Anna Pavlovna, with the same mournful smile with which she accompanied any reference to her royal patroness, gave her support to Ellen's wishes. It appeared that from some words Boris had uttered that evening about the Prussian army, Ellen had suddenly discovered the absolute necessity of seeing him. She seemed to promise him that when he came on Tuesday, she would disclose to him that necessity. When Boris entered Ellen's magnificent reception-room on Tuesday evening, he received no clear explanation of the urgent reasons for his visit. Other guests were present. The Countess talked little to him, and only as he kissed her hand at taking leave, with a strangely unsmiling face, she whispered to him unexpectedly, "Come to dinner tomorrow, in the evening. You must come. Come." During that stay in Petersburg, Boris was constantly at the house of the Countess Betsuhov, on a footing of the closest intimacy. Chapter 8. War had broken out, and the theater of it was closer to the borders of Russia. On all sides could be heard curses upon the enemy of the human race, Bonaparte. In the villages there were levies of recruits and reserve men, and from the theater of war came news of the most conflicting kind, false as usual, and hence variously interpreted. The life of the old Prince Bolkonsky, of Prince Andrei, and of Princess Maria was greatly changed since the year 1805. In 1806, the old prince had been appointed one of the 8 commanders-in-chief, created at that time for the equipment of the militia throughout all Russia. In spite of his weakness and age, which had been particularly noticeable during the time when he believed his son to have been killed, the old prince did not think it right to refuse a duty to which he had been appointed by the emperor himself, and this new field for his activity gave him fresh energy and strength. He was continually away on tours about the 3 provinces that were put under his command. He was punctilious to pedantry in the performance of his duties, severe to cruelty with his subordinates, and entered into the minutest details of the work himself. Princess Maria no longer took lessons in mathematics from her father, and only went into her father's room on the mornings when he was at home, accompanied by the wet nurse and little Prince Nikolai, as his grandfather called him. The baby, Prince Nikolai, with his wet nurse and the old nurse Savishna, occupied the rooms that had been his mother's, and Princess Maria spent most of her time in the nursery, taking a mother's place to her little nephew, to the best of her powers. Mademoiselle Bourienne, too, appeared to be passionately fond of the child, and Princess Maria often sacrificed herself by giving up to her friend the pleasure of dandling and playing with the little angel, as she called the baby. Near the altar of the church at Bleak Hills was a little chapel over the tomb of the little princess, and in the chapel had been placed a marble monument brought from Italy, representing an angel with its wings parted, about to take flight for heaven. The angel had the upper lip lifted, as though about to smile, and one day Prince Andrei and Princess Maria, as they came out of the chapel, confessed to one another that, strange to say, the face of the angel reminded them of the face of the little princess. But what was stranger, though this Prince Andrei did not confess to his sister, was that in the expression the sculptor had chanced to put into the angel's face, Prince Andrei read the same words of reproach which he had read then on the face of his dead wife. "Ah, why have you done this to me?" Soon after Prince Andrei's return, the old prince made over a part of the property to him, giving him Bogucharovo, a large estate about 30 miles from Bleak Hills, partly to escape the painful memories associated with Bleak Hills, partly because Prince Andrei did not always feel equal to bearing with his father's peculiarities, and partly from a craving for solitude. Prince Andrei made use of Bogucharovo, established himself there, and spent the greater part of his time there. After the Austerlitz campaign, Prince Andrei had firmly resolved never to serve again in the army. And when war broke out, and all were bound to serve, he took service under his father in the levying of the militia, so as to escape active service. Since the campaign of 1805, the old prince and his son had, as it were, exchanged parts. The old prince, stimulated by activity, expected the best results from the present campaign. Prince Andrei, on the contrary, taking no part in the war, and secretly regretting his inaction, saw in it nothing but what was bad. On the 26th of February, 1807, the old prince set off on a tour of inspection. Prince Andrei was staying at Bleak Hills, as he usually did in his father's absence. Little Nikolushka had been ill for the last 3 days. The coachman, who had driven the old prince away, returned, bringing papers and letters from the town for Prince Andrei. The valet with the letters, not finding the young prince in his study, went to Princess Maria's apartments, but he was not there either. The valet was told that the prince had gone to the nursery. "If you please, Your Excellency, Petrusha has come with some papers," said one of the nursery maids, addressing Prince Andrei, who was sitting on a child's little chair. Screwing up his eyes, he was with trembling hands pouring drops from a medicine bottle into a glass half full of water. "What is it?" he said angrily, and his hand shaking, he accidentally poured too many drops from the bottle into the glass. He tipped the medicine out of the glass onto the floor, and asked for some more water. The maid gave it him. In the room were a couple of armchairs, a child's crib, a table and a child's table and a little chair, on which Prince Andrei was sitting. The windows were curtained, and on the table a single candle was burning, screened by a notebook, so that the light did not fall on the crib. "My dear," said Princess Maria, turning to her brother from beside the crib where she was standing. "It would be better to wait a little. Later." "Oh, please, do as I say. What nonsense you keep talking. You have kept putting things off, and see what's come of it," said Prince Andrei in an exasperated whisper, evidently meaning to wound his sister. "My dear, it's really better not to wake him. He has fallen asleep," said the princess in a voice of entreaty. Prince Andrei got up and went on tiptoe to the crib with the glass in his hand. "Should we really not wake him?" he said, hesitating. "As you think. Really, I believe so, but as you think," said Princess Maria, obviously intimidated and ashamed that her opinion should triumph. She drew her brother's attention to the maid, who was summoning him in a whisper. It was the second night that they had been without sleep, looking after the baby who was feverish. Mistrusting their own household doctor, and expecting the doctor they had sent from the town, they had spent all that time trying first one remedy and then another. Agitated and worn out by sleeplessness, they vented their anxiety on each other, found fault with each other, and quarreled. "Petrusha with papers from your papa," whispered the maid. Prince Andrei went out. "Damn them all," he commented angrily, and after listening to the verbal instructions sent him from his father, and taking the correspondence and his father's letter, he went back to the nursery. "Well?" queried Prince Andrei. "No change. Wait a little, for God's sake. Karl Ivanitch always says sleep is better than anything," Princess Maria whispered with a sigh. Prince Andrei went up to the baby and felt him. He was burning hot. "Bother you and your Karl Ivanitch." He took the glass with the drops of medicine in it, and again went up to the crib. "Andryusha, you shouldn't," said Princess Maria. But he scowled at her with an expression of anger and at the same time of anguish, and bent over the child with a glass. "But I wish it," he said. "Come, I beg you, give it him." Princess Maria shrugged her shoulders, but obediently she took the glass, and calling the nurse, began giving the child the medicine. The baby screamed and wheezed. Prince Andrei, scowling and clutching at his head, went out of the room and sat down on the sofa in the adjoining one. The letters were still in his hand. Mechanically he opened them and began to read. The old prince, in his big, sprawling hand, making use of occasional abbreviations, wrote on blue paper as follows: "I have this moment received, through a special messenger, very joyful news, if it's not a falsehood. Bennigsen has gained, it seems, a complete victory over Bonaparte near Eylau. In Petersburg everyone's jubilant, and rewards have been sent to the army without stint. Though he's a German, I congratulate him. Commander in Korchevo, a certain Handrikov, I can't make out what he's about. Full contingent of men and regulation provision not yet arrived. Gallop over at once and say I'll have his head off if it's not all here within the week. I have a letter, too, about the Prussian battle at Preussisch Eylau from Petenka. He took part in it. It's all true. If people don't meddle who've no business to meddle, even a German beats Bonaparte. They say he's running away in great disorder. Mind you gallop over to Korchevo and do the business without delay." Prince Andrei sighed and broke open the other letter. It was a letter from Bilibin, 2 sheets covered with fine handwriting. He folded it up without reading it, and read through once more his father's letter, ending with the words, "Mind you gallop over to Korchevo and do the business without delay." "No, excuse me. I'm not going now till the child is better," he thought, and going to the door, he glanced into the nursery. Princess Maria was still standing at the crib, softly rocking the baby. "Oh, and what was the other unpleasant thing he writes about?" Prince Andrei thought of the contents of his father's letter. "Yes, our troops have gained a victory over Bonaparte precisely when I'm not in the army. Yes, everything mocks at me. Well, and welcome too." And he began reading the letter in French from Bilibin. He read, not understanding half of it, read simply to escape for one moment from thinking of what he had too long, too exclusively, and too anxiously been dwelling upon. Chapter 9. Bilibin was now in a diplomatic capacity at the headquarters of the army, and though he wrote in French, with French jests and French turns of speech, he described the whole campaign with an impartial self-criticism and self-mockery exclusively Russian. Bilibin wrote that the obligation of diplomatic discretion was a torture to him, and that he was happy to have in Prince Andrei a trustworthy correspondent, to whom he could pour out all the spleen that had been accumulating in him at the sight of what was going on in the army. The letter was dated some time back, before the Battle of Eylau. "Since our great success at Austerlitz, you know, my dear Prince," wrote Bilibin, "that I have not left headquarters. Decidedly, I have acquired a taste for warfare, and it is just as well for me. What I have seen in these 3 months is incredible. I will begin ab ovo. The enemy of the human race, as you know, is attacking the Prussians. The Prussians are our faithful allies, who have only deceived us 3 times in 3 years. We stand up for them. But it occurs that the enemy of the human race pays no attention to our fine speeches, and in his uncivil and savage way flings himself upon the Prussians without giving them time to finish the parade that they had begun, and by a couple of conjuring tricks thrashes them completely, and goes to take up his quarters in the palace of Potsdam,